Hey everybody, how's it going? Thanks for joining me this afternoon. I've got a great stream with a great guest that I think you're really going to enjoy. Before we get started, I just want to let you know that Stu and Dave Do America is a great news show on Blaze TV. It features, of course, Stu, who's one of the most fantastic guys in the business, really nice, really knowledgeable, always thoughtful. And then Dave Lando is obviously hilarious, so the team up is great. Make sure you check out Stu and Dave Do America on Blaze TV now. All right, guys, you're not going to believe this, but once again, we had a decent number of Republicans absolutely betray us on the idea of immigration. It turns out that despite the fact that Trump won an overwhelming mandate and that the voters of the Republican Party have made it clear time in and time out that they don't want to extend any kind of amnesty, they don't want to extend any form of mass migration. In fact, they want to close the borders, limit immigration, and expel those who are here illegally. Despite all of that, we still have Republicans who are running on the idea that we need to shove as many people into the United States as possible. We're going to talk about that betrayal again today. But before we get started, let me introduce you to, of course, one of your favorite co-hosts, Jay Burden. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, Auron, thank you so much for having me back on. I wish I were here under better circumstances. I wish there was nothing to talk about, but unfortunately, this situation is all too common, right? And yet again, the America First Party, the Republicans, have, they've stabbed us in the back.
Well, I only bring you on when there's something terrible to talk about. So to be fair, there is a self-selection there. But yeah, one day I'll just bring you on and we'll talk about nothing but like puppies and CZ handguns and all the things that we love and enjoy and everyone can celebrate. But that said, before we step into the larger story of immigration, there is some breaking news on the Iran war front. I don't want to make the whole show about this because really it's all yet again fog of war. Donald Trump has declared that Iran has opened the strait and that they have agreed to hand over some level of nuclear material. And in exchange, he has said that he is going to ban Israel from bombing in Lebanon in order to move this peace deal forward. Now, I hope that's true. I really want that to be the case. I have advocated for and continue to advocate for Donald Trump ending this war as quickly as possible and bringing troops home to focus on the homeland. However, right now it seems that Israel launched an attack right after Donald Trump said that they wouldn't do that, which is just kind of Israel to a T, especially in this war. And then also Iran has said that they made no deal concerning the nuclear material. And so far there is no overall understanding, but there are reports that ships are moving in and out of the strait. So does this mean that there were never any mines in the strait and Israel and America figured out that Iran was really, a bluffing the whole time? Or is there really a deal somewhere in the works, but its details are currently, being debated? It's hard to really know what is going on at the moment, but that is the news. So I'll just let people know that that could change at any given time, but that's where we're at just in this moment.
It's incredibly difficult to follow this war, particularly as we have entered this sort of phase of ceasefire in quotes, because even as someone who follows this issue relatively closely, it seems like every other story I read is contradictory. There is a ceasefire. Oh, wait, there is not a ceasefire. Israel is joining us. Israel is acting on their own. There is no war in Lebanon. There is a war in Lebanon. The strait is both open and closed at once. As one of my recent guests quips, it's sort of Schrodinger's war. The war is both on and off at exactly the same time. So it is an incredibly confusing situation. It seems as as you said, there are negotiations going on, but it seems as if the Pakistanis and others are acting as intermediaries, and that is adding confusion to an already complicated situation. And so, to be honest, I have absolutely no idea what's going on, Auron.
Yeah, this is why I try to avoid day-to-day coverage of the war. When something big happens, we try to cover it. Breaking news. But ultimately, I try not to make every one of the episodes about this because honestly, the people who are doing so, I feel like they're just kind of driving themselves into some kind of manic state because you're constantly getting information one direction or the other. As you said, we're in this moment where you would think that social media and the diversification of media sources and all the cell phones and things on the ground would mean we'd have the maximum amount of information, right? We've all seen, for better or for worse, mostly for worse, all the videos coming out of the Ukraine war with Russia and everything going on there. And yet we seem to get relatively very little on the ground footage comparatively to what's going on with Iran and the United States and Israel. And of course, we have the fact that there's these constant contradictory statements. We have Donald Trump saying one thing, Israel says something entirely different, and then Iran says something entirely different on top of that. Part of it is probably also that Iran just doesn't know who's in charge at any given moment. They have this insane situation where so many of their people have been killed and they're so far down the command structure that is there one centralized voice with which Donald Trump can even make a peace deal? That's hard to really know. Maybe that's the point. That's what Israel's hoping for, is that if you destabilize a state far enough, ultimately they want a failed state. So as long as there's no one to negotiate with, you can't achieve a peace because there's always one guy willing to fire off a rocket somewhere outside of the chain of command or with his own little platoon or, that kind of thing. So the whole thing is just a constant mess. And we could sit here and try to stay on top of the algorithm and, go blow by blow, trying to explain everything that we see. But I think so much of this is just people reading Twitter and making their best guesses. And, that's always going to be a part of the process. There's always a fog of war that's involved. But I don't think it does anybody a service to, spend 4 or 5 shows a week trying to decode what signals might be coming out of any given side of the Iran war when we can deal with things that are actually happening in the United States and directly impacting us in a way that really matters.
No, certainly. This is it's an info hazard both for commentators and listeners. And I'm sure you have seen, we will not be throwing around names, but people drive themselves insane over this war. And I understand it, right? It is an aggravating situation. We are, from a certain perspective, being screwed. And so I understand that emotions are running high. But at the same time, this information is curated, right? Not even blaming social media per se, but everyone involved has a vested interest in making you think one thing or another about this war. It is propaganda, effectively. And sure, some of it is true, right? These are real events happening, but you can sort of fall prey to that. And I'm sure the audience has seen people lose their minds. It doesn't do anyone any good because, as you've said, politics is still going on in the background. The world has not ceased to function merely to focus on this Iran war. And as we're about to talk about, the same issues that we've been talking about for years, both issues of immigration and also just outright treachery from the Republican Party. Well, just because there's a war on it doesn't mean that they're taking time off from those.
Yeah, which is, of course, why I really wanted to not get to this war at all, because I want to maintain focus on these issues. These are the ones that we care about most. These are the ones that affect our friends, our families. These are the ones that really matter to the future of our nation. It's not that Iran is not a problem. It's not that it's full of great people who love the United States, but it's just we have the most immediate problems right here. And as you say, we could do the day in, day out coverage, but it does derange you. You have to understand ultimately that one of the things about becoming politically aware and savvy, one of the things we try to push here as we're understanding elite theory and these kind of more meta-political understandings of the situation, is that you don't want to invest in things you can't control. You have to accept that there are just certain things you can't influence, that you're not going to have entire knowledge of, and you can kind of derange yourself by focusing on that stuff all the time. But it is literally built to keep you impotent, right? Like you cannot do anything. The pedals of the car, the wheel of the car, they do not connect to the engine. And so you can slam on them and turn them all you want, but you're just going to get angry because you're not going anywhere. So it makes far more sense to do your best to focus on that which is directly impacting your life, that you can have some impact over, rather than chasing something that is deliberately shrouded in a large amount of misinformation that you really ultimately have very little direct impact on. So that said, I want to talk about an issue that has recently impacted my community. So as many people are probably aware, Haitians in the United States are under a temporary protected status. It's assumed that there are about 350,000 Haitians in the United States under this. And it's a scenario where theoretically this project is there to protect basically refugees coming in from a dangerous country. But we have this agreement with several different other nations, and many of them are in varying states of chaos. Some, like El Salvador, are actually safer than the United States at this point due to the efforts of Bukele and how well his regime has worked out when it comes to criminal justice. Others, like Haiti, do continue to be dangerous, but is it worth keeping those people here? We'll talk about that more in a second. But I want to go ahead and play for you a clip from Ayanna Pressley, who is one of the main advocates. She herself is Haitian, of course, because diaspora politics rules the United States. And she wanted to push the idea that Haitians should basically be here in perpetuity under this protected status. Let me bring that up real quick here.
I'm very proud of the work, the strategy, the whip effort by my office and the coalition that we built nationally, resulting in that majority of those 218 signatures to force a vote. There are 350,000 Haitian nationals in this country. I represent the third largest Haitian diaspora in the country. I co-chair the House Haiti Caucus. And for me, this is a matter of keeping families together. It's the acknowledgement that deporting those Haitian nationals back to Haiti, a country that is politically destabilized, been ravaged by national disasters, the assassination of their president, rampant gang violence, that is a death sentence. And moreover, to separate families and to threaten several industries where many Haitian nationals make great contributions: healthcare, construction, hospitality. And so that is why I'm leading this fight. And we are currently in legislative recess, but when I return to Washington and we are back in session, that discharge petition has 7 days to ripen. 2 days to sort of call the question, to call the vote, if you will. I have every reason to believe that those signatures will hold, translate to votes.
And sadly, she was right. Now, Jay Burden, the amazing thing about this is, it's a death sentence to send Haitians back to Haiti. Now, she lists the reasons why. To be fair, she's not just throwing that out there. She lists that, okay, the government might be persecuting you, fair enough, but also that there's gang violence, civil war, chaos. In fact, she touches on basically every aspect of Haitian society. So it's not just like there's one evil dictator who's oppressing the Haitian people artificially. She's basically explaining that every corner of Haitian society is chaotic and dangerous. Now, Jay Burton, I have this crazy thesis, and you can let me know if I'm just a very racist here for noticing this. But I'm starting to believe that Haiti is dangerous because it's full of Haitians, not for socioeconomic factors, not because it was a colonial power oppressed by the United States, which never happened, but because Haitian people are generally not very good at running countries and not very good at working well in societies, even of their own creation. And so if you bring a bunch of people who are violent in Haiti and you bring them to the United States, they'll just be violent here. So when you remove Haitians from Haiti, you don't reduce the amount of danger they're in, you increase the amount of danger everyone else is in around them. Am I insane for drawing these conclusions? Is this a completely irrational understanding of the human condition?
No, it's entirely rational. And it comes down to, well, what is a country? Now, obviously, there is the material aspect, the land, the borders, that part of it. But also, there is the people, right? The actual citizens or the people who live in a country. And in the case of Haiti, it's a particularly interesting example. The island that Haiti is on has two countries on it, Haiti and the Dominican Republic. And Haiti freed itself in a dramatic, bloody slave revolt. They've been ruling themselves for quite a long time. Dominican Republic did not have that advantage. They were a colonial, they were a colony for much, much longer. So if we assume that the sort of core motivating factor that makes countries bad is racism and colonialism, well, logically it would follow that the Dominican Republic must be super Haiti, even worse. And, don't get me wrong, the Dominican Republic is not a place I would like to live. It certainly has problems. But if you look at satellite footage of the island of Hispaniola, At night, it looks like North and South Korea. One country is a country with, advanced technology like electricity and light bulbs. The other is not. You can see this even on the agricultural level, where one half of the island is green and verdant, is a destination for cruise ships. The other is a blasted hellscape. And, well, why is that? The people are, okay, not 100% the same. There is, a certain ethnic and cultural difference. One is predominantly influenced by the French, the other by the Spanish. But seemingly it would indicate that there is a cultural difference that is creating these disparate impacts, if we can use that word. And so if you take people from one location to another, gotten rid of the geography, but as we can see, even this island itself doesn't have some magical power that makes all societies turn to absolute garbage. Well, you're bringing that culture with you. You're bringing those cultural mores, those systems, those sort of informal, alliances people make that have turned Haiti into one of the most horrible, dangerous places in the world. And it's no shock that, well, when you move them to Florida, when you move them to anywhere else in America, Ohio, well, those things don't magically change. The same dirt that didn't make Haitians magically awful, well, it turns out when you bring them to good dirt, to America, the most prosperous place in the world, they don't magically transform into, latte-sipping NYT readers. It seems as if the location was largely indeterminate. The culture was the relevant value, and that doesn't simply go away after a short plane ride.
No, this is exactly right. It's truly incredible. One of the things that you say about sociology or political sciences, they're not like, real sciences because you can't do the controlled study, right? Like you really only get to look at historical events and hope that they produce some kind of case study that you can ultimately look at, but you don't get to design them in the lab. But if we were going to design an experiment in the lab to understand what makes a country what it is, the island of Hispaniola would be a pretty good one, just drawn right down the middle. What do we have on one side? What do we have on the other? And as you point out, while the Dominican Republic is, not really someplace I want to spend the rest of my life, it is a wildly, wildly better civilization to the point where they have a wall and they will just shoot any Haitians that get near it because they basically treat it as some kind of contamination that's going to destroy their society. Haiti was literally founded on a satanic voodoo blood ritual. A blood sacrifice of white Europeans was the core beginning of this. The idea that every one of these liberation theologists, like these radical Marxists, these anti-colonialists, the idea that you're just going to have the native population rise up and slaughter the oppressor and then rule itself, that played itself out in Haiti, and we can see the exact result. It turns out that being oppressed by a colonial power for a few more years is actually way better way better for your country than to go through this bloody sacrifice. And yet we see people constantly trying to bring this culture into the United States. It's absolutely crazy. And we know all of the incentives. We've talked about this many times before on the show, courting the votes, courting the ethnic blocks that are easy to manipulate, even deploying them, as we saw in Springfield, Ohio, as like direct punishment to conservative red state areas. Like the purpose is to destroy your community. It is to destroy unified communities that are going to maintain traditional values, that are going to vote Republican. It's not just the replacement, it's also the destruction that is created when you bring disruptive groups in ultimately. And I know this personally because recently a woman in my area was beaten to death with a hammer by a Haitian immigrant in one of the most horrific videos I have ever seen. I cannot show it to you. It will immediately get my video banned from YouTube. However, just, trust me on this one. It is one of the ugliest things you have ever seen. And Jay, I know the gas station where that happened. I drove by it. So this is no longer some kind of abstract understanding. This is no longer some theoretical, what is America? What should our laws be on paper? What should this look like? No, this is directly getting people murdered in my community. People are in places I have driven by, are getting murdered because of what is going on here. And yet we see the main concern is the safety, not of American citizens who are beaten to death by hammers, but to the Haitians who are coming here themselves. We also get the false argument that these people are somehow economically necessary. They're propping up the healthcare industry or something like that. No, if you look at the statistics, you can see that 65% of Haitian households are on welfare. They are dependent on welfare for their living. That means that the entire community is a net drain on the American social system. They're not providing valuable labor in totality. They are draining away the input of Americans. You and I are paying to keep these people here and possibly murder our fellow Americans. So everything about this, from the economic argument to the moral argument, is a complete lie. And yet we have to sit here and not only hear this from a Democrat member of the squad, but also see several Republicans line up behind her to make this happen.
Well, exactly. And look, I understand why some people are sympathetic to the humanitarian argument, because Haiti is a very nasty place, and you can imagine why someone would want to leave. But the problem is, this has a cost. It has a cost to lives. It has a cost to, for instance, insurance rates. If you live in Ohio, there are very real, what we would call externalities. And well, the problem is, of course, if you are the leader of a country, at least on paper, your first priority should be, well, that country, the people who live in it. You are an elected representative of I don't know, America and of its citizens. And so if you are imposing a cost on your citizens to benefit a foreign nation, well, I mean, we have a term for that, right? That's treason. And sure, it's not the same as, opening the gates to the city or, selling the nuclear plans to the Soviets. But you have killed, through your actions, at least one woman. That woman, if this had not happened, if that monster had remained in Haiti, she would still be alive. She would not have been beaten to death with a hammer. This is setting aside, obviously, the ruinous economic cost, which is compared to, an American woman being beaten to death with a hammer. I would argue, not the primary concern, but it's still very real. The fact that my tax dollars, and coming shortly after tax day, I am very much aware of exactly how much that hurts, are being used to benefit people from a foreign land. And simply because another nation is bad, things are not going well there, does not mean you have the moral obligation to go fix it. In fact, one of the lessons that I was assured that the Republican Party had learned is that we were done with foreign adventures. We were done trying to save the world. We were done trying to fix everything because we realized, or seemingly realized, that that was a fool's errand. You can't fix the world. Focus on what is close to you. See if you can fix that, especially if you are, I don't know, a politician, a person in charge of that country, a person with the agency to make those changes. But instead, we see even some of our own right-wing Republicans, the sort of rock-ribbed conservatives who care about the Constitution, who care about America, and seemingly you put them under the most mild amount of pressure from people they don't like, their ostensible opposition, and all of a sudden, all of that rhetoric goes away, and we get people killed with hammers, and unnecessarily so.
So we see 6 and eventually 7 Republicans eventually cross the aisle to vote for this. And in some cases, they give the answer of this being the Christian thing to do. Others echo the economic argument of these people work in our healthcare industries. But all of it is just insane. We see Maria Salazar, who has already floated the Dignidad Act, which is amnesty for illegal aliens. Now, as you pointed out, the Republican Party should have learned these lessons from foreign adventurism to immigration. We know that Donald Trump ran on deportations. He won on deportations. He won a mandate on deportations, won the popular vote, even won over Hispanic males on the message of deportations. So this idea that Republicans have to pander to minorities because there's just no future without telling Hispanics or other immigrants what they want to hear, that was completely undone through all of this. And yet the fact that we have the proof, we know that you can win on this message. Not only can you win, It is the winning message to sell this. Still, we see this betrayal. Now, Salazar is even worse because in, the fact that she's just amnesty all over the place for, anyone and everyone. Also, she's in Florida. So she's from the state where this woman was beaten to death. We have a high number of Haitian children in the United States. We have a high number of Haitian families in the United States. I used to teach a high school that had a very high Haitian population. I'm very familiar with those communities and the level of violence and dysfunction that is incredibly normal and is accepted inside those communities. You do not want this in your country. And yet the people who are not just representing, if you're some guy in, Nebraska, I can understand why you don't get the Haitian, question, right? But if you are literally someone running a state, you are representing a state in which that population is literally murdering people, we still can't get a solid vote on this, which is just absolutely insane. Now, the good news is that the Senate Republicans have already said they are not going to let this pass. And because it is a standalone bill, it's not attached to an omnibus or anything, Donald Trump could ultimately veto it should it make it to his desk. But the fact that this is even floated in the first place and that these people are not fearful of making these arguments in front of the Republican Party is insane. I mean, Maria Salazar was endorsed by Donald Trump. Now, Donald Trump, again, probably would veto this bill if it came in front of him. But why wait? Why not trash Salazar for what she's doing? Donald Trump has time to post about Tucker Carlson, to tell people to go listen to Mark Levin. It's not like Donald Trump is very careful about wading into disagreements. He'll even correct his own staff on his Twitter. Why can't we get a denouncement of Salazar? Why aren't we stripping these people of committee assignments? Why aren't we punishing these people, primarying these people, threatening them? Trump, threatens Thomas Massey, Rand Paul. These are people who I have disagreements with, but clearly are just miles better than someone like Salazar. But not only does Salazar get the endorsement, when she pushes a project like this, she gets no punishment. And it's very simple. If they think they're going to get away with it and they get all the benefits of being endorsed by Trump and none of the downsides of crossing him, they're just going to keep crossing him. Why is Donald Trump more interested in attacking Ron Paul and Thomas Massey, who, again, I have my problems with, but why is he more interested in attacking them and not Salazar? It's absolutely insane. This is why I'm so worried about us being involved in these foreign conflicts. I think if we had actual focus on what was going on, really getting deportations done and everything else, we would probably hear more from the administration pushing back on these people. Instead, we get what looks like betrayal from the Republicans. I know that the Trump administration is better on immigration. I know that the conservatives have done a better job under the Trump administration on pushing this stuff, but the average person looks at this and says the GOP has betrayed me. Yes, it's a handful of people, but it's representative that the GOP is unwilling to go to bat and cause any kind of disruption or any kind of punishment for these people when they do this. And that makes people believe, I think with a real reason to believe so, that ultimately the deportation stuff has become unpopular with the admin and maybe they're shuffling it to the back. I've heard these rumors from people inside. We've heard from new DHS secretary that ultimately they're trying to do things below the radar. They're trying not to be in the news. I get that. You want good optics, but it seems more and more that we are giving up in certain areas when it comes to deportation because it might be unpopular while we fight a highly unpopular war in Iran. And I think this is a just huge mistake on political capital being allocated.
Well, 100%, because the other thing that happens is that this is a long-term play for the Democrats, right? They understand why this matters because, yeah, sure, the people who are admitted on this this program are ostensibly not voting. We'll see, but at least currently, if you're born in America, you are an American citizen, right? This enables certainly a form of chain migration where once you have a daughter or a son who's an American citizen, it's much easier for you to become one. Also, as we've seen with the Somali community, these diaspora groups tend to funnel a lot of corruption, into the whole NGO complex. So the Democrats understand why. There's a reason that no Democrat voted against this, because it is massively in their interest to funnel these people into America, right? It improves their political position. Maybe not massively right away, but it's a long game. And so, if you are ostensibly in control of all three branches of government, you should be looking to long term increase your power, right? Make the next hand easier for you because you can do that. You can do that entirely legally. There's nothing wrong with voting against a bill. I mean, that's again why you're there. So, why wouldn't you make yourself more powerful, right? That seemingly, if you were just going off of pure selfish self-interest, right? These are the most amoral, Machiavellian figures. You would expect them to do that. And somehow, that is not what we see. We see Democrats playing politics as if it is a game to be won, and they are winning. And you see conservatives not, and they are losing because of that. This is the pattern we have seen over and over and over again within the conservative movement, the nominal right in America, is that they are not power players. One of the things that Auron, I know you and I both saw as a positive development within the MAGA movement and certainly Trump 2.0 was a different attitude towards power, a realization that you must play the game in a certain way to increase your power long term. That was smart. Doge was smart because you are hurting your enemy's ability to play the game long term. And this is a reversion to the same loser politics that enabled the last 60 years of democratic victories in America. And if this attitude doesn't change, they will keep winning forever because fundamentally they are better at politics than you are. That's exactly how simple it is.
Well, and there are some really rising stars. I think of guys like Brandon Gill of Texas who are doing great work. Guys like Eric Schmidt who in the Senate who are doing fantastic work. There are a new breed of Republicans moving in, especially some of the younger guys in this scenario. However, we can still see that much of the Republican class is not people who are in any way interested in representing Americans or fighting for their districts or their interests. They are people who are wholly bought by the machine. In fact, not only are they bought by the machine, not only are they part of the uniparty, not only are they completely indifferent to the people they rule, they actively hate them. Like you can see the seething contempt dripping off of these people. So, for instance, Don Bacon here is from Nebraska. Now he is thankfully retiring soon, so there's he won't be around much longer. But you can see that he lends himself to this vote, and when he's trying to defend it, he's debating people on Twitter, and a lot of people, myself included, were in the replies to all of these people on Twitter, telling them how we felt about what they were doing, letting them know how they were just betraying the country, they were traitors, this is treason, and Don Bacon is fielding many of these comments, and he decides to himself dig in on his own Twitter account. This isn't some this is not some intern running the account posting the most little blase stuff, all the little memes or talking points or whatever. This is him, and he is going toe to toe with his own people that he's supposed to be representing. And he says here, I'll vote my Christianity and American values. First, nothing about your Christianity or American values tells you need to bring people in to murder people in my community. So not only are you bringing these people in, you're now blaming Christianity or American values for your willingness to harm people. There's nothing about what Jesus said. He said to care about your neighbor, not to get them beaten to death by a hammer. Don Bacon is in violation of Christian values. He does not care about his neighbor. He's not loving his neighbor as himself. He's getting that person murdered. He is a violator of Christian values. He's not a proclaimer of Christian values for doing this. But on top of this, he also says, you've convinced me now to look at Venezuela and El Salvador temporary protected status as said. Thanks. So he is directly threatening Americans right here. Because he wants to own somebody on social media, he is willing to directly threaten to bring in and keep in more migrants in the United States, even for countries like El Salvador, like I said, that are more safe than America. He knows there is zero reason to keep El Salvadorans here except to punish Americans, to make sure Americans don't get jobs, to make sure that their housing prices go up, to make sure that these people stay on welfare and drain our economy. He knows what he's doing. He is using these people as weapons, not against, Democrats, not against the left. He's using them as weapons against his own voters because he hates them. He hates them and he wants them to know it. He wants to spit on them in public. This is disgusting behavior. This is the kind of behavior that, well, this is why you write a Declaration of Independence and swear oaths, right? Like, that's what people like this deserve. G.K. Chesterton is right about this type of politician. I'll just put it that way. So, like, this is absolutely insane. The fact that this guy has not lost every committed assignment he has tells you how weak and feckless the Republicans are. Again, I'm glad that this bill seems to have very little chance of making it through, actually getting passed by the Senate and then the president. But I don't just want it to fail. These people need to be taught a lesson. An example must be made of people like Don Bacon. You cannot let a man who claims to be a Republican threaten to just inflict immigrants as a weapon on the United States. And that really tells you that everything these people say is a complete joke. It's a complete lie, because he knows what he's doing. He knows he's using these people as direct biological cultural warfare against his own people. He knows it and he brags about it. He thinks it's funny. That's a Republican.
It's almost hard to describe the level of spite that conservative leaders have for conservative voters. This level of just pure disdain, it is sort of hard to wrap your mind around. Because look, Auron, you and I are fairly political, right? It's what we do for our job. But even my enemies, like the people I really despise, I don't think I think about them in the same way that this alleged Republican thinks about, oh, I don't know the people who live in his district. Right? The insane level of just pure disgust shown in that, where it's like, oh, you hated that? Well, guess what? I'm going to do it even more. I'm going to rub your nose in diversity. A statement, ironically, made by, a left-wing British figure, but oddly enough seems to apply to our own ostensibly mildly nativist Republican Party. And one of the things that I think we should mention, we talked earlier, of course, about how, the Dominicans view this issue. Right, where they take their border security very, very seriously. And so, well, one could assume that, having been neighbors for quite a while, they would understand it. They would understand what living next to Haitians was like. They've had a lot of practice. And their conclusion was, no, we don't want you coming here at all. Central American racism is sort of confusing to me. I don't understand it at all. But I will say, I am very much aware of the fact that Dominicans do not like Haitians at all. They do not want to be associated with them in any way. The sort of scenes that you see from the Dominican Republic are sort of out of the worst nightmares of, anti-ICE activists, right? The sort of actual going door to door with rifles, looking for the outsider that, you saw in all of the AI generated ads talking about, Trump's America, right? The sort of scare tactics. And so seemingly, if the people most acquainted with this view it as something that ought to be avoided, okay, that should certainly, put some questions in our mind. But our own elected leaders are basically saying, oh, you thought that was bad? Well, here's what you get for being mean to me on the internet. I'm going to do it even more. Oh, you thought that was bad? Just watch. And again, over what? An internet argument? Right? Wrapping yourself, sort of Jesus washing your opinion? No, we don't have to put up with this. This is not how our elected leaders should act. This is not how elected leaders act in a serious country. Or, would you call the Dominican Republic a serious country? I don't want to impugn the honor of the Dominican Republic, but seemingly they don't act like this. A literal banana republic. And so somehow, in the most wealthy, the center of the world, right, a hub of industry, hub of finance, we are treated worse by our own deep red conservative representatives. It's absurd, genuinely absurd. And so when you look at the polls and you see, as you've said, the Republican Party is not doing well. They've lost hard among young men. They've lost hard among even non-college educated white voters, right? The Trump demographic. Well, you have to ask why. And 100%, the war is part of it. The high gas prices are part of it. But honestly, I think for most people, the war is sort of more symbolic, right? You and I are nerds. We care a lot about foreign policy. We dig into all this stuff. But I think for a lot of people, it's like, wait a minute. This is what you're focusing on? You're not doing the things that I asked you to do that you said you'd do. You'd fix immigration. You'd fix the economy. You're wasting all this time and effort on those guys over there. And then when they look to their elected GOP leaders, what do they see? Oh, well, when the eyes aren't on them, they turn into Democrats. They're threatening their own voters with even more. Like, oh, be nice to me or else. It's like, well, this isn't how this works. This is a conditional relationship. I give you something for something. It's the most basic part of politics. And to see, allegedly, the party that is in power, a party that doesn't do the things it used to do, that isn't for losers anymore, adopting the same loser attitude, adopting the same things which have led to decades of democratic rule, effective or, formal, whichever way you want to look at it. You just want to pull your hair out. Have these people learned nothing? Seemingly, they somehow haven't and are winning, at least briefly, despite themselves.
Well, and Jay, I understand that this is probably not going to make it through the Senate, and if it did, Trump could veto it. But we have to see a cost paid, because when you don't, people believe that this behavior is at the very least accepted inside the Republican Party. As you said, they've lost a lot of young men, especially those who are disillusioned over some of the promises they feel are broken. If you want to win those guys back, show them that you're serious about immigration. This costs you very little to make an example of these people. I get that every Republican or Democrat president has some member of their party in Congress who goes rogue, right? Like, I get that Donald Trump does not have complete, total, unified control over every Republican congressman. I totally understand that. However, when you endorse someone like Maria Salazar and you say nothing when she's doing stuff like this, it starts to add up. People start to ask questions. And look, I have made this case many times that ultimately people saying, oh, well, go vote the Democrats to punish the Republicans. No, that's dumb, because as bad the Republicans are, even one term under a Democratic president, we already saw, we'll get to that in a minute, how devastating that can be. However, there's only so many times I can say that before I understand that if you keep not delivering, if you keep signaling to people who voted for you that you do not care about these issues sufficiently, they're not going to show up for you. And I can't blame them. I'm not going to tell them to vote for Democrats. I'm not going to tell them that the election doesn't matter. I'm not going to tell them any of that. But if you sit there and you fail to deliver over and over and over again, and you fail to punish those who are actively working against you in your own party, when you have the ability, don't tell me Trump can't attack Salazar. Don't tell me that the Republicans can't strip these people of their committee assignments. When you sit there and you tell me over and over again, we're not going to do anything about that, I can't blame people when they then don't show up. That is your fault. That is no longer their fault. You are sitting in a scenario where you have control over at least some of these levers of power, and you can't be bothered because, frankly, you're distracted arguing with people over the Iran war on the internet, which is just a dumb thing to be doing while we need to handle this. Now, here is a recent appearance from the DHS Secretary Mullen here, and here's what he says on Fox News in an interview with Laura Ingraham.
Right. To qualify as
they take advantage of the United States generosity, but the problem is that we want immigration. We want legal immigration, people that want to make the country stronger. We're a nation of immigrants. We understand
the right kind of immigrants.
But the right kind of.
So, new DHS secretary swapped out for Noem for obvious reasons. By the way, biggest winner of the Iran war, Kristi Noem, okay? Because nobody's talking about her cross-dressing husband right now. But, she's swapped out. We get this new DHS secretary, and just a few days into the job, it's, well, we want immigration. We just want legal immigration. So it's like we just hit the reset on the chatbot. We're right back to talking points from 15 years ago from the Republican Party. No, we don't want more legal immigration. Specifically, repeatedly, we have made it clear that is not what we want. We want the opposite. We want fewer people coming into the country, legally or illegally. Legal immigration is just as much of a problem at this point. And yet, we get the talking point of, well, yes, of course we do want legal immigration. But it's not just that. He then reveals a little later in the interview that at least 20 million illegals came in under Biden. Now, I've heard 8, I've heard 10. But Secretary Mullen says 20 million new illegals. Now, Jay, you and I have heard 10 to 15 million illegals in this country for what, 3-4 decades at this point. We knew that number was going to be a joke, right? We knew it was probably closer to something like 30 million. But if we got another 20 million under Joe Biden, that means there are at least 50 million illegal immigrants inside the United States. And we also learned from the Trump administration that there are another 50 million outstanding visas giving people access to enter the United States at any given time. Now, they're not all here, but a lot of them are constantly moving in and out, which means we could have up to 100 million people at any given time in the United States who are foreign. Jay, that means a quarter to a third of the United States at any given time could be a foreigner. That's where our money goes. That's where our infrastructure goes. That's where our jobs go. That should be an absolute outrage. We should be dedicated to never allowing something like this again. And yet it seems that the Trump administration is looking to maybe dial back some of the public deportations, not go as hard. We just had another key member of Homeland Security and ICE leave in the middle of this. It is not looking good. All signs are pointing against an increase in deportations. Now, again, the 2 million people who have left or been removed by the Trump administration is still an improvement. A closed border is still an improvement to a Biden or Harris administration. I recognize that. I will count those as wins. But it is very clear that if Joe Biden can bring in 20 million people in 4 years, and we can only deport 2 million in 1 year, and again, less than half of those are actual physical deportations. We're counting self-deportations as well here. But 2 million versus 20 million, we are never catching up. We are never winning another election again unless something changes radically. And it seems like rather than this lighting a fire into the Trump administration to ratchet up deportations to the next level, it seems at the very least we're holding steady or possibly throttling down.
Well, here's the other thing, right? Even if we accept that the sort of conventional wisdom that, you know, the optics of ICE raids were so bad that they were going to torpedo anyone's chances on the, you know, the right side of the ticket of winning in the midterms or in the presidential elections, which I don't think is true, but let's accept it. Well, okay, what you were doing then is basically saying, well, we're going to take a lick now to make our chances better going forward because we understand the game electorally with the, you know, the flow of money with illegal immigration and with legal immigration as well. Well, okay. So that's at least an argument, right? That there is a long-term reason to basically take an immediate hit in popularity for a long-term victory or the chance at a victory. But we're still doing other things that are really, really unpopular. I don't know, like a war. And seemingly that's a price worth paying, the consequences in the next election. So seemingly when another country basically picks up the phone and says, hey, you're going to fight with Iran, something that multiple top Trump officials have alleged that, right? That is a political calculation where it's worth making, right? We're willing to sacrifice political capital for that. But when it comes to, I don't know, the things you literally promised to do, or also your long-term chances of maintaining a viable electoral strategy, well, that's too difficult, right? We couldn't do that. That would be mean. And so again, the question becomes, well, what is the purpose of this party? Is the purpose of this party to act as a political party, right? To increase its own power, to represent its voters, even just to, you know, enrich and make the people at the top of that organization powerful? Seemingly not, at least in the same way that the other side of the aisle is. And really, it goes back to, you know, I believe Michael Anton, right, coined the term or the idea that the Republican Party are the Washington Generals to the Democrats' Harlem Globetrotters, right? The designated losers, the guys who get dunked on every election over and over and over again. That's why they're there. And I may naively assumed that Donald Trump was correct when he said he taught the Republicans how to win. They were going to get sick of winning. Well, that didn't happen, clearly. And it's salvageable, right? Something could be done. But if current trends continue, it seems as if, well, nothing has changed. It's a flat circle. The last 20 years of this MAGA revolution were apparently a waste, right? We're doing the same things we used to do. We're losing in the same ways. And as you've said, deportations are great. A closed border is great, 100%. I'm not going to say we should go back and undo those things. But we have to understand the straits that we are in, the current situation, how this problem will evolve over time. And guess what? You don't get to be even a shell of a political party if you lose on this issue. It becomes effectively a one-party state. We understand how these groups vote. We understand how these demographics transform states. So, I don't know. What's your plan? Especially when we have all been assured a multitude of times for the past 2 years, certainly, that Trump officials are going to go to jail. We hear Democratic politicians saying this all the time. They're going to be investigated, and we understand, just look at Letitia James, what investigated means. If they look into you, you're going to jail. The consequences, even for the guys at the top, just them, not you and I, Auron, are dire. They're very real. You have people suggesting that Hegseth is going to go to The Hague, which probably won't happen, but at least it indicates that they're really, really mad and they want to punish him. So you would assume, even for their own selfish self-preservation, that this would be a top-line issue, because this is what prevents you from being able to stay in power. The fact that your opponents can just basically print more voters, bring more people in. It's absurd.
Jay, the minute that Donald Trump was shot and he stood back up and pumped that fist, I was sure that everything was going to change. That switch seemed to have flipped. You could see in his eyes that it was no longer about, being famous or, getting back in the White House because people will shake your hand and be excited to see you. He wanted to be there because there was retribution. If nothing else, what we knew about Donald Trump is even if he wouldn't do it for the country, he'd do it for him, right? Like, you made him bleed. You tried to put him in jail. Like, Donald Trump's back was against the wall. He was Caesar who couldn't return home because if he did, they'd arrest him, right? Like, this is where he was at. This is the moment where these world historical figures are forged. And it seemed like a perfect storm was meeting to turn Donald Trump into that moment, to turn him into that man in that moment. And when he entered office with that flurry of activity, when he won the election decisively and he started signing all those executive orders, it seemed like he was that guy, that he had learned the lesson, that we had put new people in charge and there was a new way we were going to do things and we were going to be aggressive and we were going to move fast and break stuff and we weren't going to care. And now, as you say, I feel like I'm going crazy because all of these people are going to go to jail and we are never going to have a legitimate election again if a Democrat wins. As Curtis Yarvin pointed out, and a lot of people did not like him saying this, the American people are just never going to have an armed revolution. They're not going to do it. If they were going to do it, they would have done it. And so because of that, mass immigration is basically going to go unpunished. You think you've seen mass immigration? No, you haven't even seen mass immigration. You think 20 million people is a lot? Try 50 million. Try 100. Because the Democratic Party is going to open the borders even wider than it did last time when they come back into power. And not only are they going to throw Donald Trump and everybody else they can into jail, they will radically transform the demographics of this nation to make sure that it is absolutely impossible for us to ever win anything again. And despite this very obvious fact, we're at war with Iran. And again, I've heard so many people tell me, oh, you can walk and chew gum at the same time. You can do both. No, clearly you can't. In fact, we can't do either. We are neither securing the type of deal we wanted with Iran in the first place, nor are we deporting the people we needed to get this done. Now, I'm 100% of the idea that we need to do unpopular things to win. I totally get that. But there is a certain stock of political capital with which you can do unpopular things. And when you spend it all on an unpopular war, you don't get to spend it on unpopular deportations. And when you tell me, well, we are worried about the midterms, so we will do the war, but we won't do the deportations, you're telling me what your priorities are. You're telling me who you serve. It's not the American people. Because if it was, you'd be pushing the unpopular thing that saved the American people, not the unpopular thing that saved some other country in the Middle East. And so it's very clear that we're willing to go to the mat and blow up midterms and blow up elections and the future of the United States so we can go fight a war because Israel really wanted it. We are not willing to do deportations because that might make us unpopular here. This is the classic trap. You think you can get more done overseas, so you go overseas instead of fighting the hard battle here. It feels like you're getting a win, maybe. But ultimately, not only does that not work out, but even if it had worked out, you spent all your time and effort over there. And so now the battle that would have gotten you more power doesn't happen. Trump just approved, or was just bragging about the fact that he's going to get a FISA extension passed. 2 years ago, Trump was saying we need to get rid of FISA because it was used against me. That was one of his goals of the administration, was to get rid of it. Now, I'm not a libertarian. I'm not the guy who says, oh, well, the government having power in all circumstances is bad and we have to be careful what we hand over to our enemy. But you're literally setting up a scenario where you will have solved the Iran question for the Democrats. You will have handed them the power to spy on you. And then you will relinquish control of the government to them so they can bring in another 20 million illegal immigrants and ensure you never pass a law again. So all of your wins are just you building things that your enemy will use against you and then making sure you don't stay in power. That's what the wins are. This is just the worst tactical maneuver you could make. Anyway, sorry guys. I know that was not another uplifting episode, but that's why we try to talk about the war as much as possible, really, at this point. That said, there are several questions from the audience stacking up. So before we go to them, Mr. Burden, where can people find your fantastic work?
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on, Auron. I appreciate you bringing me on for all of the most depressing episodes. I was talking to my brother-in-law, and I said, oh, I'm going to be on Auron. And his response was, oh, it's one of those episodes then. So anyway, in all seriousness, I really do appreciate the opportunity. But you can find me, Jay Burden, on Jay Burden Show, one episode every day. Just put out an episode on the Iran war, where we went over many of the same points. You can also check me out on Substack, where I just dropped a free article a few hours ago called Dershowitz, Zealot for a Foreign Land. Figure out that is also on a similar related topic. Again, Auron, thank you so much for having me on.
Of course, everyone should be listening to the Jay Burden Show. Let's go to our questions here. We've got, no, I'm not Grim from Red Riding Hood says, why is Kevin Hart in the thumbnail? Look, man, okay, what are you trying to say? What are you trying to say? That is a distinct and very separate person wielding a hammer. But yeah, moving on. Tiny Stupid Demon says, I am once again reminding everyone that there is no such thing as the Republican Party. Moldbug speaks of this. Yeah, and I mean, the hope was ultimately that Donald Trump would be a vehicle to destroy the Republican Party as we understood it, that it would be remade into something that could be a nativist populist vehicle. And that was, whether we like it or not, there is a two-party system and we do have to engage at some level, unless you've decided that you're just done with politics, in which case I totally get it. But the Republican Party is at the very least the only outlet that you can turn towards your purposes. But it is unfortunately very clear that that victory is not in any way entirely won, and that the old GOP is still very much influential inside the party. Joe McDermott says, I can't tell the difference between living under a GOP elected MAGA and being conquered and colonized by a hostile empire. Again, sadly, it's the only vehicle available at the moment. We just don't have a parliamentary system where we can make a Rupert Lowe like they did in the UK or something like that. The last time we got a new political party was the Civil War. That actually became a true national sustained force. That said, I totally understand the sentiment. I get that it's very depressing right now. The Republicans absolutely refuse to make good on any of these promises. Trump is not helping the situation. Again, I'm not going to tell people to go vote Democrat. I'm not going to tell people, to support the anti-white open borders party explicitly. But I get it. I get if people don't show up to this election, and the GOP will have no one to blame but themselves. Grim also says 6 and eventually 7 Republicans. Yep, believe it or not, it was 6 for the initial resolution and then 7 for the final vote. So they actually somehow added people after all of the outrage over what was going on. And Wild Speaker says, question for Auron and Jay, with the presence of ethnic cartels becoming more brazen and U.S. politics crafting bills to benefit their in-group, what are the chances there are white identitarians begin to appear in politics? I think it's going to be difficult for that to happen explicitly. What I do think is you're going to see people more aggressively arguing against anti-white politics. We've already seen this. People are more and more willing to use the term anti-white. They're willing to recognize ethnic interests and ethnic cartels. Will that eventually raise some level of white identity in the United States? It could. When you increase the salience of identity, that includes all identities, including white identities. But I doubt you will see some very explicit white interest only politician or party in the way that sadly many politicians work for other ethnic groups in the United States. I think the key thing here is to continue to expose those ethnic cartels, to make it clear to people this is the game being played. A lot of times it's obscured with ideology. Oh, it's communism, it's Islam versus capitalism, or Zionism or whatever. It's like, no, if you actually look into these, it's just ethnic cartels all the way down. And I think once people recognize that, it'll be harder and harder them to deny what's going on.
Well, and on that point, I think that if current trends continue and white Americans become a minority politics becomes more and more attractive, right? So any moral claims aside. Also, I think it's important to recognize that, yes, all politics is identity politics, fundamentally. I think that there is a hazard in the kind of race baiting slop that we see other prominent figures engage in. And while I don't have someone in mind, I think that if we had sort of a white Jesse Jackson, that would be a very bad thing for America, not simply because, I think that there's something wrong with white people, but if you look at what figures like that tend to do, they tend to enrich themselves a lot and not actually do very much for their ostensible constituents. That is not an argument against identity politics per se, but when there is a situation where there is a group of people who feel as if they themselves are being discriminated against, they're getting the short end of the stick, and seemingly there is no legitimate outlet for those grievances, you've created an opening for hucksters. You've created an opening for grifters, to be perfectly honest. And so the correct way to solve that problem is to, solve that problem, right? Make it so that those people don't feel as if they are being screwed. But, as we've spent an hour talking about, our elected leaders don't seem to be willing to make those decisions. And so, to be honest, I think that race relations more broadly are going to continue to get worse simply because at least one party is hell-bent on making them worse.
Yeah, I mean, obviously a lot of people have done a lot of complaining and whining and fear-mongering about the idea that white identity could be on the rise. But all those people who are yelling about that and concerned about that never are willing to take any actions to actually remedy the issues and therefore cut off the formation of white identity politics. If, as you say, you resolve these ethnic carve-outs, if you stopped allowing for this obvious race-based favoritism in our system, then there would be no reason for white identity to become salient. However, we see people who continually tell us this is the most dangerous thing in the world, refuse to address these issues head on to resolve this issue. And so they are basically doing hyperstition. They're like, they're bringing the thing they're worried about into being because they are worried about it. They are so terrified of the idea that acknowledging any form of grievance that could be legitimate by the white population of the country, therefore, they're ensuring that those people feel more aggrieved and eventually turn to more radical solutions to this problem. If you really were worried about this, you would simply take actions to resolve these issues before people started making them the central aspect of their politics. Because I want to be really clear here. I don't think that long term that's necessarily going to be a winning strategy for Americans. However, you cannot run around saying the worst part of anti-white bigotry is that white people might notice it and might work to solve it. I'm sorry, like that is not going to be a winning argument. And all your yells of racist and Nazi are eventually going to fall flat because people are going to say every other ethnic group is, ultimately fighting for their interests, and I'm the only one who can't. And there's only so long you can tell me that the worst thing that could possibly happen about me being discriminated against is me noticing and taking action about it. That is a losing argument, and it will ultimately end up exactly where these people say they don't want to be. The Demi Find, maybe, says, when you elect someone who's not a politician, you shouldn't be surprised that he doesn't understand politics. Yeah, but that's always been Trump's like greatest strength and greatest weakness, right? On one hand, he doesn't understand the process. So he makes mistakes. He says outrageous things. He blunders into stuff. He doesn't know who to appoint. He doesn't understand how the system operates. The other side of that is because he doesn't know how the system operates or where the guardrails are, he has completely run over people, right? Remember the first term when we just got the straight up Muslim ban? Like we didn't even bother hiding, that in the language. Trump only gets to do that stuff because he doesn't know and he doesn't care, right? So you're right that there is, this is the downside, right? We love the upside when Trump didn't understand politics and it was doing good things for us. We like that. Now that there's some problems with that, it's a downside. But this is the deal you're making when you put a guy like Trump in that scenario. DB543 says conservatives need to stop the LGB without the T. They're just as bad. The posts I've seen on X about acquiring kids is disgusting. Yeah, actually, I'm trying to put a show together on surrogacy, so hopefully I'll do that soon. But yeah, I don't want to ruin that show by getting into. There's a whole nother video going around on Twitter right now that if I talk about, I will just absolutely fly off the handle and lose my cool. So I'm not going to talk about it. Just say this, human trafficking of children by homosexual couples is absolutely insane. And it is an absolute blight on this country. The fact that we allow it really is one of the most disgusting things I've ever seen. And I think you're absolutely right about that.
Millstones.
Yeah, it's millstone problems require millstone solutions. I'm a classic. Jesus, good enough for Jesus is good enough for me, is my motto when it comes to the proper punishment for that one. Wild Speaker says, sounds like white identity as defensive necessity. Again, I think that's probably what's going to happen if these guys do not figure this out, and I don't think they will. I think you are probably going to see that. Again, I doubt you're going to get like truly explicit, like shameless pandering in the way that you do to other minorities in the United States. But I do think the acceptability of some level of collective white identity will be forged. I mean, people, even Chris Rufo has talked about this. Jeremy Carl has talked about this. When you have a group of people who is oppressed, and I'm sorry, I know some people don't like that word, but you cannot look at the literal encoding of anti-white bigotry in the United States, in all of our laws, in all of our institutions, and say there's not some level of oppression there. We have a group that is collectively vilified and attacked and blamed for everything. You will forge an identity. That will happen. The Black Americans didn't start as Black Americans. They started as Blacks, Africans from many different tribes and areas and peoples. But they forged into one identity because they had one struggle, one shared group that they were seen as, and so they became one. If that continues to be the case in America, as it has been for basically my entire life, then yeah, that's a natural outcome that's going to occur. And all the whining and all the crying and all the kvetching, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter because ultimately that's going to occur no matter how many times you wag your finger at people and demonize them when you are continuing to provide those incentives. All right, guys, we're going to go ahead and wrap this up. Once again, always fantastic to have Mr. Burden on the show. Make sure that you are checking out his work. If it's your first time on this channel, you need to click subscribe, bell notification, all that stuff on YouTube so you know when we go live. If you want to get these broadcasts as podcasts, you need to subscribe to the Auron MacIntyre Show on your favorite podcast platform. And when you do, leave that rating or review. It helps with the algorithm magic. Thank you, everybody, for watching. And as always, I will talk to you next time.